Today on the podcast, we have some big news from the CEO of Anthropic. Connor's been posting about this on LinkedIn and it's kind of blowing up. So if you're not following him over there, you should. I love there's an article that Mashable wrote about this whole story. And they said Anthropic CEO warns AI will destroy half of all white collar jobs. I just thought that this I just think it's like so extreme. It's like it's going to destroy them. And of course, the caveat here is like there's going to be some changes and replacements. I love how the media, spins it for clicks. But there was, I think, some really interesting things that were said. There's some interesting things happening with Anthropic. We're going to dive into all of that. Before we do, I wanted to mention if you've ever wanted to really change the way you think about AI, you need to try out Connor's AI Mindset course. There's a link in the description to it. I have people sending me messages like on Instagram or LinkedIn where they're like, hey, by the way, I just tried Connor's Mindset course this week. Absolutely blew my mind. I'm going through it. This is like super revolutionary. Thanks for like shouting it out and mentioning it on the podcast. So to all of those people, you are welcome. And if you haven't tried it already, make sure to check it out. The link's in the description. All right. Connor, tell us what you're seeing from Anthropic. I know you're blowing up on LinkedIn about this. Super cool story.
Yeah. So this is such a big story that I'm getting texts from, people like all over, like of all different, like people who don't usually follow AI news are texting me about this. So to be sort of specific about what was happening, must have been when Dario Amodei was talking about Claude 4. I can't remember the venue. I apologize. But essentially what he said was that he said AI could wipe out 50% of entry level white collar jobs within 5 years. So let's just make sure that we know what we're talking about here. And the reason that I was so fascinated by this and I was doing a lot of writing about this is it comes on the heels of the LinkedIn, one of these like sort of senior executives at LinkedIn, also having this op-ed in the New York Times saying that the bottom rung of the career ladder is broken, right? Because new college graduates are having a hard time getting work and all that kind of stuff. And you can think about why that would be and why Dario Amodei is saying this really extreme thing. Because think about it, right? When young people are coming in, they are trying to do the tasks that AI already does very well, right? And so in this New York Times this New York Times op-ed, it was talking about the bottom rung and saying, look, here's how other companies are handling this, right? Like, so KPMG is now giving its, entry-level people more complex tasks, and certain law firms are giving them, ways of dealing with clients right away. Because when you think about it, right, Jaeden, it's sort of things like, coders would learn on just sort of like basic code, right? Paralegals would, learn just by like doing basic research and all that kind of stuff before they would advance. And that's all changing because AI can do that. And so what I'm telling companies and what companies should be doing is rethinking how they're hiring. Like, what do those entry level jobs look like, right? So
Yep,
what that
100%.
means is that if AI can do 70%, and this is kind of like my own benchmark, but if AI can do 70% of what's in the job description for your person, you're hiring for the wrong role. And Jaeden, you and I talked about this all just before we got on the air. You were talking about how you're using operator, deep research, all this sort of stuff to do these amazing things. But when you think about what those tasks are, it's like, summarizing, coding, researching, all that kind of stuff. So I say all that to say that not only is this happening now, excuse me, but also that engineered Anthropic, what was his name? Sholto Douglas, right? He also kind of like went slightly viral at exactly the same time by saying, and by the way, I totally agree with this. He's like, that is true what Dario Amodei is saying. And also, it's not like we have to wait for the AI to get here. Like, this is with AI right now. And I've often said that if everybody was actually using ChatGPT 3.5, but everybody was actually using it, we'd already be way, way, way ahead of what we are right now. So anyway, I say all that, Jaeden, to say that it makes logical sense. Now, the big takeaway from this is, and this is what we do in the course and all that kind of stuff, but like the big takeaway from this is that the revolution here and the disruption is not technological, it's behavioral. The tech is already here. It's already going to change all this stuff. It's just a matter of whether people are using it and using it sort of like a companion rather than a fancy Google. Anyway, throwing all that in your lap, what do you got?
Okay, if I'm being 100% honest, I actually believe that this is very, very likely the way things are changing. As far as like jobs being eliminated, I think job tasks are going to be eliminated. I think a more accurate description is not 50% of jobs will be eliminated, but 50% of maybe tasks that you do in a job will be eliminated. Sure. And like, this makes perfect sense. We're on a huge technological shift when, different technologies, the steam engine, textiles, when things were invented, no longer are you hand weaving t-shirts anymore. You just have a machine that does it, but now you got to like run the machines, whatever. We've all had the same discussion before. What I do think is a really interesting point here, though, is kind of how big of a picture he paints in this.
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say before I get into that is in my own personal experience, this is very true. So when I first started my software company AI Box about 2.5 years ago, when we were developing the first like prototypes and MVPs, before as we were going to looking at getting funding and kind of like building out the company, we hired, we're a very scrappy, lean team. So we would hire people like that were still in college or right out of college to be like front end engineers. So these are what you'd call entry level positions. And a lot of times, like these weren't like the best people, but they were like really cheap and they were kind of new. And we would give them tasks like, okay, we have the hardcore coders that have built this back end and built the functionality of this really impressive like interface. We need you to go and pretty much change the design. Here's like a picture from our designer. Just make what the coders, because the coders, when they'll build something, it's kind of like janky with these big ugly green neon buttons, and they're just like, I don't know how to develop like design. I'll throw everything you want on a page. You go get someone to make it look pretty, and you save a lot of money, by the way, if you split that up most of the time. In any case, we'd get these entry level people, they'd run through, and they would spend sometimes days on a page where if you were really talented, you could get it done much faster, but we didn't care because they're really cheap and we actually saved money that way. Okay, that is completely gone because today, Claude Code will do that in a matter of seconds. The redesigns on the pages are so fast. And even if we hired that same developer today and they were using Claude Code, they could get the same job done super, super fast. So all this to say, like sometimes the most difficult part with the AI models is that the very junior level people coming into your company might not have enough experience to use the AI model to go as like pretty much if the AI model is going to 10x whatever you can do, if you give it to someone that's already 10 times better, it's like you're getting a X on it. And so you have to ask yourself, do I want 10 people to get the 100X, or do I just want to get my 10X guy and 100X what he can do? Like that's a very realistic thing. And so that I think is the only dynamic to think about. It's like entry level people won't, like they still could do a lot more with AI, but I think what's going to happen is they're going to need to train themselves up a little bit better, work on growing their skill set a little bit more. And then when they jump in, they'll be able to run with it, and they probably can charge more money. But yeah, it is a tricky spot with entry level people, and like we wouldn't hire an entry level person unless they were AI fluent. If they were like, "Hey, could you train me to use AI tools and how to run your stuff?" It's like, you either got to know how to run our stuff, and we'll give you the AI tool, or you got to be really good with AI tools,
Yeah.
and then we just know you'll be able to be up and running.
Yeah, so this is such a good point on this, and it actually kind of like helps crystallize my thinking because I try to talk about this stuff all the time, Jaden, and I think you've kind of hit on something for me, which is I often talk about how domain expertise is the most valuable thing in the age of AI, and I
Yes.
don't mean that do you know how to sort of like run this or do a spreadsheet or whatever. What I mean is, do you understand what your company is trying to do you understand like what good quality looks like? So sometimes the analogy I do is like if I'm a marketer, or rather if you tell me, hey, you have 20 minutes and create a new shoe brand or something like that, I could do something like that in 20 minutes. It'll be extraordinary from where I am like right now, right, with AI. But if you have a marketer do it in 20 minutes, they'll create something extraordinary because they'll understand like, oh well, that's not good, but this is good. And what about this demographic? And oh, we didn't create a blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't even know what those terms would be. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and so I would just be
100%.
creating whatever ChatGPT thinks about marketing. So to your point, it's so interesting, right? Because you can't just bring in people who are going to use AI because let's say you brought somebody into a law firm or something like that, like that person wouldn't really understand like what are lawyers looking for, like when they're summarizing, like ChatGPT could summarize all that kind of stuff. So there has to be, it's interesting, right? You're right, they either have to be sort of like a higher level that you bring in and then they gradually learn AI, or they have to be so good on AI. And I know people like this, and you're one of these people for me too, which is like people who just like go and do deep research first and figure out like, okay, pretend that you're a lawyer in here and this is the kind of law you do. Like, what would they be asking me? And then you sort of like trust. And then no matter what, your first draft or whatever be way, way, way advanced. So this is happening, but you're right in that it's not just like a one-to-one, oh, now press a button and AI does this. It has to involve somebody who understands what you're actually trying to do, right?
Yeah, no, I think that you're thinking about that 100% the right way. Okay, as we're wrapping this up, I wanted to read a quote from Dario because I just thought this was so interesting. He said, "We, as the producers of this technology, have a duty and an obligation to be honest about what's coming. I don't think it's on people's radars." He said, "It's a very strange set of dynamics where we're saying you should be worried about where the technology we're building is going." He says a lot of critics have said, we don't believe you, you're just hyping it up. And I think like it's pretty tricky because this is something that feels like does definitely happen a lot in Silicon Valley. His response to that is, well, what if we are right? So all this to say, I mean, I have been a big fan of Anthropic from the very beginning. I'm really happy that they've found it feels like they found a very useful niche with Claude and Claude Code and what they're doing there. They're, they kind of have this big focus. And, if he's telling the truth and he's really just from genuine, I think this is something that should concern a lot of people, and people should have pause to think about. And I'm sure there will be critics that say he's just hyping this up. So, that's up to you to decide where you think he falls on this. But anyways, thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. We really appreciate you joining us. Make sure to leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and we will catch you in the next episode.